I woke up before the sun today. The house was entirely quiet, the kind of stillness that only exists at 5 in the morning here in Tennessee. I made my usual pot of black tea, poured a cup, and sat in my worn leather chair by the window. While I was waiting for the sky to lighten, I found myself looking at an old black and white photograph of my father kept on the bookshelf. He was a hard-working man from Ohio, someone who believed in quiet endurance. He worked through pain, ignored his own fatigue, and never complained. And every single day of his working life, he carried a metal lunchbox filled with thick deli meat sandwiches, sausages, and cured cuts. We all thought that was just what a strong man ate. It was normal. It was what sustained him. I grew up believing that a sandwich was just a sandwich, that bacon on a Sunday morning was a harmless tradition, and that a hot dog at a baseball game was just part of being alive. I thought that way for most of my life. I carried those exact same habits into my 20s, my 40s, and right into my 60s. I am 77 years old now, and if I could go back in time and walk into that kitchen in Ohio, or into my own kitchen just 20 years ago, I would take those packages of processed meats out of the refrigerator and throw them directly into the garbage. I am telling you this today because I wish someone had sat me down and told me sooner. The body warns before it collects. Most people realize far too late what their own biology has been trying to tell them for decades. Some damage happens completely silently, in the dark, microscopic spaces of our cells, until one day it simply is not silent anymore. The turning point for me did not come easily. It never does for stubborn men. It came during a period when my wife Eleanor faced a serious health crisis. I will not go into the specific medical details out of respect for her privacy, but I will tell you that the weeks we spent sitting in waiting rooms, staring at sterile walls and listening to doctors use words we barely understood, fundamentally broke the way I looked at aging. When you are sitting in a chair holding the hand of the person you have loved for 50 years, waiting for a test result that could change the rest of your lives, your perspective on a quick, convenient lunch changes forever. I realized how fragile the human machine actually is. More importantly, I realized how much of our own decline we actively participate in, completely unaware of what we are doing. After that period, I could not just go back to normal. Normal was what had gotten us into trouble. I had spent decades in publishing and educational communication, making complicated things understandable for a living. I decided to point that exact same skill at my own life. I started reading. I brought home stacks of medical journals, books on cellular biology, and research papers on human nutrition. I sat in this exact room with a pencil in my hand, underlining things until the pages were gray. I am not a doctor. I have never been a clinician. I am just a man who realized he was running out of time to fix his own mistakes and who wanted to be around to see his 3 grandchildren grow up. What I found when I started digging into the reality of processed meats disturbed me so deeply that I could not sleep properly for days. I had always assumed that the warnings about bacon, deli ham, hot dogs, and cured sausages were just the usual nutritional nagging. You know the kind I mean. The experts tell you not to eat too much of anything enjoyable. I thought it was about sodium. I thought it was about cholesterol. I thought if I just ate a little less of it or bought the slightly more expensive brand at the deli counter, I was doing fine. I was completely wrong. It is not about the fat. It is about what happens to the cells in your digestive tract when they are forced to interact with the chemicals used to preserve those meats. I remember the afternoon I was reading a particular paper on food preservation. I traced my pencil under a paragraph explaining what nitrates and nitrites actually do. These are the compounds added to meats to keep them looking pink and fresh on the grocery store shelf for weeks, preventing them from turning the gray color that meat naturally turns when it is exposed to air. On the surface, it seems like a miracle of modern food science. But the paper explained what happens when those specific preservatives hit the highly acidic environment of the human stomach. They undergo a chemical reaction. They transform into compounds called nitrosamines. I had never heard that word before. Nitrosamines. I sat there in my chair and read what that compound does to human tissue. It is a known, documented, undeniable carcinogen. It directly damages the DNA lining the stomach and the colon. It physically alters the genetic blueprint of the cells it touches. I realized with a cold knot in my stomach that every time I ate a slice of cured turkey thinking I was making a healthy choice, or every time I put pepperoni on a pizza, I was voluntarily swallowing a compound that was going to work, microscopically, to break down the integrity of my own cells. I was paying money at the grocery store to bring home a slow, invisible damage. This led me to a question that took me weeks to fully answer, and it changed my entire approach to eating. If I had been damaging my cells for decades, what was actually happening inside my body right now? That is when I stumbled onto the concept of cellular environment and a biological process that I now think about every single day. Before I tell you about that process and what I started doing to reverse the damage I had caused, I want to pause for just a moment. If you have been watching my videos and you find some value in an older man sharing what he has learned the hard way, I would ask you to check if you are subscribed to the channel. Many of you who sit with me here every week are not subscribed. It is a small thing, just a click of a button, but it helps me know that these conversations are reaching the people who need to hear them. It helps me keep doing this. The concept that completely shifted my understanding of aging and disease is the realization that cancer is not necessarily something you just catch out of nowhere. From what I have come to understand, microscopic abnormal cells exist in all of our bodies all the time. As we age, our cells divide billions of times and mistakes happen. Bad cells are formed. But a bad cell sitting isolated in healthy tissue is just a bad cell. It cannot do much harm on its own. It needs a blood supply. It needs nutrients. It needs an environment that allows it to grow. I learned a word during my reading that I believe every person over the age of 60 needs to understand: angiogenesis. It simply means the creation of new blood vessels. Our bodies use this process to heal wounds. If you cut your finger, your body builds new blood vessels to bring oxygen and nutrients to the site so it can repair the skin. It is a beautiful, life-saving mechanism, but I learned that abnormal, dangerous cells can hijack this exact same process. They can send out chemical signals that trick the body into building microscopic blood vessels directly into them, feeding them, giving them the oxygen they need to multiply and become a true threat. When I understood that, everything clicked into place for me. I realized that my daily habits, my food choices, were doing one of two things. They were either creating an environment that encouraged those bad cells to grow, or they were creating an environment that starved them out. And all those years of eating processed meats, filling my gut with nitrosamines and chronic inflammation, I was essentially throwing fertilizer on the weeds in my own garden. I was giving the abnormal cells exactly what they needed to thrive. I realized I did not just need to stop eating the things that caused the damage. I needed to start eating the things that would actively cut off the blood supply to the damage. I needed to starve it. I stopped buying processed meats entirely. Not a reduction, not eating them only on weekends, a complete and total stop. It was not easy at first. When you have eaten a certain way for 60 years, your brain is wired to crave the salt, the convenience, the familiar texture. I would open the refrigerator looking for a quick slice of ham out of pure muscle memory. But every time I felt that urge, I pictured what I had read. I pictured the microscopic changes in my colon. I thought about Eleanor. I thought about my grandson, who I want to be able to lift into the air without groaning in pain. The cravings disappeared when the reality of the consequence became clear to me. But stopping the bad habit was only half the equation. I needed to rebuild the environment inside me. I started looking for foods that naturally interfere with that process of angiogenesis. Foods that tell the body not to build blood vessels toward abnormal cells. What I found was not some expensive exotic supplement. It was the humblest, most common things in the produce aisle. I started with the cruciferous family: broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, cabbage. I learned that these vegetables contain compounds that, when broken down by chewing, create powerful defenders in the gut. They actively seek out inflammation and calm it down. I used to boil broccoli until it was gray and lifeless when I was younger. Now Eleanor and I lightly steam it or roast it with a little olive oil, keeping it crisp so those compounds remain intact. We eat something from that family every single day. I do not view it as a side dish anymore. I view it as daily maintenance for my cellular machinery. Then came the alliums, garlic and onions. This was perhaps the most fascinating discovery for me. I used to just chop garlic and throw it immediately into a hot pan. But I read something that made me change how I prepare food forever. Garlic contains a compound and an enzyme that are kept separate inside the clove. When you crush or chop the garlic, you break the cell walls, and those two things mix together, creating a powerful new compound called allicin. Allicin is known to be incredibly hostile to abnormal cell growth. But here is the detail that blew my mind. If you throw that chopped garlic directly into heat, you destroy the enzyme before it can finish doing its job. So I changed my habit. Now when I am cooking, the very first thing I do is crush and chop the fresh garlic. Then I leave it alone. I push it to the side of the cutting board and I let it sit there, exposed to the air for exactly 10 minutes. I use that time to wash the other vegetables or set the table. In those 10 minutes, the chemical reaction happens. The allicin is formed and stabilized. After that, it can survive the heat of the pan. It sounds like such a small thing, but it is the difference between eating for flavor and eating for survival. I do it every time now. It has become a ritual. I also completely changed how I look at berries. Blackberries, raspberries, blueberries. I used to think of them as just a sweet treat, something to put on top of cereal. But I learned that the dark pigments in these fruits are packed with compounds that are highly effective at restricting that unwanted blood vessel growth. They literally help starve bad cells. Now I keep a bowl of fresh berries in the refrigerator, and I eat a handful every afternoon. Not as a dessert, but as a deliberate choice to flood my system with things that protect it. I incorporated more omega-3 fatty acids, mostly through wild-caught salmon and walnuts. I learned how deeply chronic inflammation fuels cellular mutation, and how omega-3s act like water on the fire of that inflammation. None of this happened overnight. It took me months to transition my routine. I made mistakes along the way. The biggest mistake I made early on, and one I see a lot of people make, was trying to find safe versions of the things I gave up. I went to the store and bought highly processed vegan sausages and plant-based deli meats, thinking I had outsmarted the system. But when I actually put on my reading glasses and looked at the ingredient list, I realized I was just trading one problem for another. They were packed with artificial isolates, excessive sodium, and oils that cause massive inflammation in the body. I was avoiding the nitrates, but I was still feeding the inflammatory environment. I had to learn to let go of the concept of the cold-cut sandwich entirely. I had to learn to eat real food that looked like the earth it grew in. I am telling you all of this because I know how easy it is to look at your life at 60 or 70 or 80 and think that the damage is already done. I hear people my age say it all the time. They say, well, I have eaten bacon my whole life. If it was going to kill me, it would have done it by now. Or they say, you have to die of something, you might as well enjoy your food. I understand that sentiment, I really do. It is a defense mechanism against the fear of aging. But from what I have noticed, from what I have lived, dying of something is not the part we should be afraid of. It is the years of slow, painful, restricting decline that precede it. It is the loss of dignity. It is the inability to get down on the floor with a grandchild. It is the burden we place on the people who love us when our bodies break down from things we could have easily prevented. You do not need fear, you need attention. You need to look at the food on your plate and ask yourself if it is feeding your health, or if it is feeding the things that want to destroy it. I cannot promise you that eating broccoli and letting your garlic sit for 10 minutes will guarantee you live to be 100. I do not have a crystal ball. But I can tell you what I feel in my own body at 77. I wake up with a clarity I did not have 10 years ago. My digestion, which used to cause me daily quiet grief, is entirely peaceful. I look at my wife across the table, and I look at the pictures of my children and grandchildren, and I know that I am doing everything in my power to remain a strong, capable presence in their lives. Envelhecer bem, aging well, begins with what you stop ignoring. It begins when you decide that tradition and convenience are no longer good enough reasons to compromise the only body you will ever be given. If you are still buying those plastic packages of processed meats, I am asking you, man to man, to stop. Leave them on the shelf. Walk over to the produce section. Buy the things that grew under the sun. Chop the garlic. Let it rest. Give your body the tools it needs to fight for you. I have found that when you finally start protecting your own biology, it has a remarkable way of protecting you right back. Take care of yourself. I will see you next time.